Yeah, I'd have to agree. When I was reading it too, I was thinking that, and this was what I found so interesting, Bill, when I was reading Source Code, that even though you have lived such a otherworldly life in so many ways, there were so many relatable moments from a parenting standpoint. And when I was reading it, I was thinking about my father too, who wasn't around a lot when I was younger. He was working, both my parents had to work. And to the point you just made right now, like my father wasn't there when I was playing rugby, or he wasn't there when I was swimming for my, local club, or he wasn't there on the sidelines cheering. And for me, that really allowed me to become the man I wanted to be. And it allowed me to have more freedom almost, to not feel like there was this heavy expectation. And I've always seen that as a positive thing, because it allowed me to have a broader definition of what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be a son, what it meant to go off and discover something that I was passionate about. And so even seeing you kind of having your mother be the one who was almost, pushing the expectation and what the family should be, but then having a bit of freedom, it was interesting to see how that impacted you, to be able to push back, to be able to, even at one point, like you said in that letter, like parent him almost in his decision, and play that role. So it was refreshing for me to read a book about you where I was actually seeing parts of myself in certain relationships in a very relatable way. Did you ever anticipate that when you were writing it?
I was surprised, so when I'm describing going on those hikes, I was thinking, boy, would I have let my son go off? And we really are holding back children a bit more, out of a sense of, okay, ultimate safety, I guess. But, in that generation, I was allowed to take trips and hikes, and I think it benefited me. And so writing the book, I was like, wow. And you've talked with people like Jonathan Haidt about this. Are we a bit overprotecting, kids so that they don't get to make, mistakes or try themselves out or mature the way that is best for them?
Do you think schools failing children?
If you have 30 people in a class, it's pretty tough. You're going to have some kids who are behind and some who are ahead. Even the best teacher has got a big challenge with that. Education, I wouldn't say, is much better or worse today than a few decades ago. We've always thought, okay, when we bring the computer in, will that helpful? And certainly if you want to find information, it's been great. We're still working on that now with the AI. Maybe a personal tutor will be encouraging and work on your level. It's early days, but I've been out seeing some of that in classrooms. People like Saul Kahn with Khan Amigo that our foundation is helping to support. But education, the computer has not made it so, oh, wow, kids learn a lot more today than they did a long time ago. And I still believe we can change that. But it means if you're in one of those large classes, you can feel lost. And, we're missing, great human potential. You tend to manage other people the way you manage yourself. The first time I felt it was when I was hiring people who moved their family and they had kids. And I was like, if I can't pay this guy his check, this is rude. He's got a real problem. And I'm kind of implicitly promising him I've got this thing figured out. So that scared me.
What is your favorite mental health habit? This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We talk a lot about red flags in relationships, the things to avoid. But what about green flags? Those qualities that show someone is kind, supportive, and emotionally safe. Like when they listen with empathy, respect your boundaries, or celebrate your growth. Therapy helps you not only spot these green flags, but also cultivate them in yourself and your relationships. It's a space to learn, grow, and build connections rooted in trust and love. Whether you're dating, married, creating deeper friendships, or focusing on your own journey, therapy can guide you toward relationships that pour positivity back into your life. That's where BetterHelp comes in. It's fully online, making therapy convenient and affordable, with over 5 million people already using it worldwide. You'll have access to a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties. And if your first match isn't the right fit, you can switch therapists anytime at no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Jay's Top 3 to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Jay's Top 3. What are we getting wrong? Because it sounds like you felt maybe the computer would give people that impetus and the ability to download more and learn more. Where have we gone wrong?
Well, the key is motivation. If you have a kid who's super motivated, then yes, going to the Khan website and doing, hours of math problems, that's great. But in a way, that takes the kid who's in that top 20% and makes him even more intimidating to the other ones. And, people can come in and if a kid in 8th grade says, is math a subject you have any confidence in? If they answer no to that, they're 5 times more likely to drop out. And so we do lose kids, and it's more out of motivation. And so most of the stuff we've done on the computer is about, okay, if you are motivated, we'll help you out, and not so much about how you make it feel relevant to them and give them a sense of success. And maybe this time around with these AI personal tutors will get that right. But kids check out. No, I'm not one of those kids who's good at math, even though for a lot of professions and, for college courses, we require Algebra 2 tests to be passed in order to go on and, even be a nurse or a policeman. So we have work to do.
Yeah.
But more on the motivational side.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, actually, because I do think that we think about changing education as so theoretical and functional, but it is the drive, it is the motivation. And I was thinking about how we put limits on ourselves. When I finished 6th grade, I remember before I went to high school, my favorite subject was math in 6th grade, and my least favorite subject was art. And then when I finished high school, my most favorite subject was art and my least favorite subject was math. And it was just fascinating to me how that completely flipped over a 7-year period. And as I've grown up in my own life, I found that art and design, philosophy, economics are far more where I naturally gravitate toward. But so much of that up until 6th grade was the limits or the things that were expected of me as opposed to what I was motivated and driven towards. And I was thinking about something you said in the book. You said that if you were growing up today, you would have been diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum. And I was wondering, how would that have affected you? How do you think that would have affected you?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that because for some people, being given a label is a pejorative to them and, almost feels shameful. Although we know, being on the spectrum gives you, almost some superpowers of concentration that if you find the right place, it can be helpful. Other people, they're glad when they get that because then they say, oh, that's why, my social skills were slowed to develop. And, here's some strategies that people like me have used. I'm not alone in this. I fit into this, and it's actually a reasonably common thing. There isn't like some medicine, ADHD, which I probably also would have been diagnosed with. They do have the Focalin, Adderall, a variety of things they give kids for that. And I still wonder about that. I haven't chosen as an adult to get a diagnosis or use those medicines. I think eventually you learn to, adapt. I still kind of rock a little bit that when I'm thinking hard and without even knowing it. And it does bother people sometimes. And that's definitely kind of what they call self-stimulation behavior that, makes it pretty likely I fit into that diagnosis.
Do you think it would have changed your trajectory of success? Have you thought about that? Or
I worry that I might have thought of it as pejorative. It's really how you communicate it. I mean, if you say, hey, here's a kid who doesn't socialize at all, and you're, sort of destined to, never be good at those things. Obviously to create a company, hire people, motivate people, go out and, sell the dream of computing. I've had to, even though I'm not a natural, develop a lot of social behaviors. And it might have discouraged me unless it was done in a very tasteful way. I think of that Dr. Cressy experience where he didn't make me feel terrible while enlightening me that I was wasting my time as well as my parents' time.
Yeah. Did you continue therapy after that, or ever go
Yes,
therapy again?
Most periods of my life, I found it useful to have a therapist where I'm talking to about, what's confusing or what's troubling. I think, I'm very lucky to have that. I think particularly if you have a life where some extreme things happen, that, luck is a huge part of that to, keep you know, keep you on the ground. A good therapist can play an invaluable role there. So yeah, I've benefited to this day from those kind of conversations.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about in the book, obviously you beautifully introduced us to Kent. And obviously the loss of Kent seems to be a place in your memory that's naturally so difficult and fuzzy. And you talk about in the book how you're not quite sure what your parents would have said and how it all felt. And I was just wondering if there were any, did you have support at that time through therapy and other ways to deal with that grief?
No, and I've been looking recently at people like Anderson Cooper talking about, okay, how do you deal with grief? And, a lot of what they come up with is that if you can keep talking about the person and, what you got from them, you're kind of honoring them. Kent's parents obviously were the most affected by this because, they would never have this incredible son and, who would have no doubt gone off and done incredible things. And I remember spending time with them for like a year afterwards and then feeling a bit guilty that as I got busy, I didn't do that as much. In the book, I actually start out where I've seen Kent's father. I run into him right as I'm starting work on the book. And, we can talk about what a great influence he had on me. And, so I did think that was helpful. But boy, it took me a long time because death, it was just such a shocking thing. I had this idyllic childhood. Other than Kent's death, nothing at all traumatic. And we're talking all the time. A little bit I reach out to Paul to kind of feel, Paul Allen, who goes on to found Microsoft with me, to step in and, be that super close friend. But back then, the idea of how you dealt with trauma was mostly, hey, buck up, get on with things, which after a few months, I did.
Yeah. And also at that time, you're talking about how he actually invited you on the trip he went to. And like you're talking just before he goes off, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, we used to talk every day, or, and that it can feel so disassociated from yourself in that moment, it feels like. How did you revisit that? Did you kind of turn towards working through the grief as you wrote the book? Did it feel like you were revisiting it because it was left
definitely
behind?
At that high school when I built a hall in his name and gone out there and talked a little bit about the role that Kent played in my evolution. So some efforts to honor him. Sadly, Paul Allen, also the other key friend in this book, died, I think, about 6 years ago from cancer. And, he also was very key at getting me on the right path. And there wouldn't be, without those two friends, there really probably wouldn't be anything like Microsoft.
Yeah, you talk about how Paul was setting you little challenges and would ask you to, try this or do that, and then you'd go ahead. And I was thinking how amazing to have a friend that can motivate and inspire you in that way. And then I was thinking about what you just said when I was reading the book, that it felt like you told so many stories of so many people in your life that are no longer here now. And so grief wasn't just about Ken or Paul. There's so, just so many individuals that you've had life with, that you're having to process that with. What has been helpful for you genuinely deeply inside that has led to some sort of helpful direction with that grief of writing a book about all these wonderful people that you've lost?
Well, most of my life has been about looking forward.
Yeah.
And okay, let's get this innovation. Let's do it first. And, whether it's software or saving children's lives, which is the big foundation thing. And it is a little bit unnatural for me to look back because you have to say, okay, how do I describe my relationship with my mom in an open, honest way and yet honor her? How do I talk about Kent, where I don't know if he'd lived what would have happened, but, probably, something that he would have very much been a part of it. And so it's awkward to look back because you have to deal with these things and talk about, should have I have spent more time with his parents afterwards, because eventually I stopped doing that. But, this year I turned 70. I mentally don't feel like I think of a 70-year-old, but, it means, I'm in the final third, no doubt, of, what I've been very lucky to live. And so, I really did force myself, say, no, there's some lessons out of this, telling people how lucky I was and maybe a few lessons for them as parents or how they navigate success. And so once we got going on it, I've enjoyed it quite a bit. I have to say, when I'm reviewing it and editing it, I'm very slow because I'm, reliving these things. So it always takes me about 3 times longer to take some pages and edit than I predict. Or if it was, something like about climate or pandemics, I'm pretty fast. There's no deep emotion that I have to relive as I'm editing something scientific.
Yeah. What was your favorite part to relive, and what was the hardest part to relive?
Well, everything about the fascination we had, and you're like, what? We see this thing. These computers are going to be amazing, but no one else is saying that, so we must be wrong.
That's crazy.
And that contradiction. So, Paul, actually, I helped him get a job out in Boston so he could be out there and bugging me that, okay, should we go build a company? And then finally, when this kit computer, which is so limited, but it's the beginning of the revolution, when that comes out, then, Paul's argument we should go and do something, he wins because we don't want to be left behind. We want to be there from the very beginning. And then we meet a few people, although it was still a very small movement. We meet other people like Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, who also, have been infected with this idea of, okay, we're on to something that